The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Granite hummed with the usual evening chaos. Metal trays clattered against tables, conversations overlapped in a dozen competing volumes, and the smell of reheated chicken and overcooked vegetables hung thick in the air. Corporal Raina Thorne stood in the serving line with her tray, her gray eyes scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who always knew her exits. She wore her uniform like everyone else, her dark hair pulled back in the same regulation bun. But there was something in the way she held herself that suggested careful economy of movement, as though every gesture had been considered and refined. Staff Sergeant Vance Kellerman commanded the center table like a throne. His voice carried across the hall as he leaned back in his chair, one boot propped on the bench beside him. He had the build of someone who lived in the gym and the confidence of a man who had earned his reputation through 12 confirmed kills over 2 deployments. The soldiers around him listened with the attention reserved for good storytellers and popular leaders. They were talking about Helmand Province, about a firefight that had gone sideways until Kellerman made a shot that dropped a hostile at 400 meters. He described the wind, the angle, the way the target fell. The table erupted in appreciative noise. Raina took her seat at the far end of a different table, near the wall. She preferred the periphery, always had. A few soldiers glanced her way. The new arrival always drew some attention, but most ignored her in favor of their own conversations. She began eating with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, cutting her chicken into uniform pieces. Specialist Drew Cabrera dropped his tray across from her with a friendly grin. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of eager energy that deployment had not yet worn down. "So you just got here yesterday, right?" he asked. "Where were you before this?" "Around," Raina said. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying just far enough to be heard. Cabrera waited for more, but when nothing came, he shifted topics. "Kellerman over there," he nodded toward the center table, "was just telling us about his longest shot. 400 meters in Helmand. Pretty impressive stuff. You seen much action?" "Some," Raina said. "Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Perhaps you have military bases near you, or you know someone who has served in places like this, in forward operating bases scattered across Afghanistan, where soldiers from all over the country come together." Kellerman's voice rose again, and this time it was clear he had noticed the conversation at Raina's table. He stood and walked over with the casual swagger of someone who owned every room he entered. His friends followed like an entourage. "Hey," he said, settling onto the bench next to Cabrera. "You are the new corporal, right? Thorne?" Raina looked up and met his eyes. "That is right." Kellerman smiled, but there was an edge to it. "We were just swapping war stories. You got any good ones? Where did you deploy?" "I have been around," she said again. "Around," Kellerman repeated, his smile widening. "That is specific. Come on, humor us. Any firefights? Any confirmed kills?" The table had gone quiet now. Other nearby soldiers turned to watch. Raina set down her fork and considered the question for a moment, her expression neutral. "I have 47 confirmed," she said simply. The mess hall did not fall silent all at once. It was more like a ripple, conversations dying in waves as the number registered. 47. Soldiers turned in their seats. Someone laughed nervously. Kellerman's smile froze on his face. 47, he said slowly. 47 confirmed kills. "Yes," Raina said. Kellerman looked at his friends, then back at Raina. He started to laugh, a genuine full-throated sound that broke the tension like shattering glass. The mess hall erupted. Soldiers at other tables joined in, the laughter spreading like wildfire. Kellerman slapped the table. "Oh man," he said, wiping his eyes. "That is amazing. 47. Did you count the ones in your video games too?" Raina's expression did not change. She picked up her fork and resumed eating. The laughter continued around her, building on itself. Someone shouted from across the room, asking if she got all 47 in one Call of Duty match. Another voice suggested she must have been counting practice targets. Kellerman leaned forward, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that everyone could still hear. "Look, I get it. You want to fit in, make an impression. But you have got to keep it believable. I have 12 confirmed over 2 deployments, and I am proud of that number. 47 is Hollywood stuff. You are telling me you have got nearly 4 times my count? Reyna chewed her chicken, swallowed, and took a sip of water. I am not telling you anything, she said quietly. You asked and I answered. Right, Kellerman said, standing up. Sure. Well, thanks for the entertainment, legend. He emphasized the nickname, and it landed like a brand. His friends laughed again as they returned to their table. The nickname spread through the room in seconds, repeated with varying degrees of mockery and amusement. Cabrera looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Reyna, then at the other soldiers, then back. That was kind of rough, he said quietly. Reyna finished her meal without hurrying. When her tray was empty, she stood, cleared her dishes, and walked toward the exit. Eyes followed her across the room. She could hear the whispers, the speculation, the laughter that bubbled up in her wake. She pushed through the door into the Afghan night, where the temperature had already dropped 20 degrees from the daytime heat. The base was a grid of concrete barriers, prefab buildings, and strategically placed watchtowers. Floodlights created pools of harsh white illumination separated by deep shadows. Reyna walked the perimeter path, her boots crunching on gravel. Above her, the stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, untouched by light pollution, the same stars that had watched over this land for thousands of years. In her quarters, a cramped plywood box she shared with no one yet, Reyna unpacked her duffel with the same methodical care she applied to everything. Her gear was worn but meticulously maintained. A rifle case, longer than standard issue. A spotting scope in a hard case with foam cutouts. Clothing without unit patches. At the bottom of the bag, beneath carefully folded uniforms, was a letter. The DoD seal was visible at the top, but several paragraphs were obscured by thick black redaction bars. Only fragments were readable. Exemplary service. Unique operational environment. Sustained performance under extreme conditions. The signature at the bottom was illegible, the title reading only Senior Operations Officer. Reyna placed the letter in her footlocker and closed the lid. She sat on her bunk and allowed herself 30 seconds of stillness, eyes closed, breathing controlled. Then she stood and began her evening routine. Equipment check. Weapon maintenance. Planning for the next day. The laughter from the mess hall was already distant, already irrelevant. She had heard worse. She had survived worse. Words were just noise, and she had learned long ago to filter noise from signal. Dawn arrived at Forward Operating Base Granite with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The sun broke over the eastern mountains and turned the sky from purple to orange to brutal white within minutes. Reyna was already awake, had been for an hour, completing her morning routine with the precision of a Swiss watch. She emerged from her quarters at 05:30 to find that her new nickname had solidified overnight like concrete. Hey, legend, a private called out as she passed on her way to the PT area. Get any kills in your dreams? The joke spread across the compound like a virus. Soldiers she had never met grinned at her knowingly. Someone had apparently spent the evening doing the math, calculating that 47 kills would require an impossibly dense deployment schedule or supernatural abilities. The consensus had formed. She was either delusional or a liar, and either option was entertaining. Kellerman stood at the center of the PT formation, leading the morning exercises with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely enjoyed physical punishment. His voice boomed across the gravel yard as soldiers dropped for push-ups. When Reyna took her place at the edge of the formation, he made a show of pausing. Morning, legend, he called out. Hope you are ready for some real combat today. We're doing a full PT test. Let us see if you have got the fitness to back up those stories. The formation rippled with suppressed laughter. Reyna said nothing, simply assumed the front-leaning rest position and waited for the count to begin. The push-ups came easy. She had learned early in her career that physical fitness was the one language everyone respected, the one currency that could not be faked. Her form was textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, her pace steady. Kellerman watched her complete the maximum count without apparent strain, and his jaw tightened slightly. He moved on to sit-ups, pull-ups, the 2-meal run. Reina matched or exceeded every standard, never showing off but never struggling. It should have earned respect. Instead, it seemed to irritate Kellerman further, as though her competence in this area somehow made her claims about marksmanship more offensive. After PT, during the weapons maintenance hour, Kellerman held court in the armory. He had arranged his rifle on the cleaning mat like a museum piece and was explaining basic marksmanship principles to a group of newer soldiers. His voice carried clearly across the room to where Reina sat methodically disassembling her M4. Now, the key to accurate shooting, Kellerman said, is trigger control. You cannot just yank it back like you're playing Halo. You have got to squeeze, smooth and steady. He demonstrated with an empty rifle, his finger pressing the trigger with exaggerated slowness. This is fundamental stuff. Any real shooter knows this. He glanced toward Reina as he said it, making sure everyone caught the implication. She continued working on her rifle without looking up, her hands moving with unconscious efficiency through the disassembly process. The bolt carrier group came out in one smooth motion. The firing pin slid free. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and set aside with the kind of practiced muscle memory that came from performing the task thousands of times. Cabrera, cleaning his own weapon nearby, watched Reina work, and then looked at Kellerman's demonstration. There was something different in the way she handled the weapon, a kind of intimate familiarity that went beyond routine maintenance. When she reassembled the rifle, she did not need to look at her hands. The components simply came together in the correct order, the pins sliding home with precise clicks. Lieutenant Marcus Holloway entered the armory and surveyed the room with the weary expression of an officer who had been deployed too many times to care about anything except mission completion. He was in his mid-30s, running slightly to fat around the middle, with thinning hair and permanent exhaustion etched into his face. "Kellerman," he said, "I need you to brief the new patrol routes this afternoon. And someone find me the maintenance reports for the vehicles." Kellerman straightened. "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then added, "Sir, about the new corporal." "Thorne, what about her?" Holloway said, already losing interest. "Just making sure we are on the same page about her placement. Given her unique claims about her combat record, I was not sure if you wanted her on regular patrol rotations or if we should ease her into things." Holloway looked over at Reina, who was reassembling her rifle without apparent interest in the conversation. "What claims?" "She says she has 47 confirmed kills," Sir Kellerman said. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Holloway's eyebrows rose. 47. He walked over to Reina's station. "That true, Corporal?" Reina looked up, meeting his eyes with that same neutral expression. "Yes, sir." "For what deployments?" "Various assignments, sir. My previous postings were specialized." Holloway waited for elaboration. When none came, he nodded slowly. "Well, that is quite a number. I will pull your file, and we will discuss your assignment. For now, you are on Tower Watch. Tower 3, starting at 1300. He walked away before Reina could respond. Tower Watch was the least desirable duty on the base, a 12-hour shift of staring at empty desert and fighting boredom. It was also the assignment typically given to soldiers who were being punished or sidelined. The message was clear. Kellerman smiled. Tower Watch. Perfect place for someone with legendary sniper skills. You will have plenty of time to imagine more targets. The soldiers around him laughed. Reina finished reassembling her rifle, ran a function check, and stood. She racked the charging handle once, the metallic sound sharp in the armory, then slung the weapon and walked out without a word. Private First Class Zoe Hammond caught up with her outside, jogging slightly to match Reina's steady pace. Hammond was a medic, early 20s, with the kind of earnest determination that suggested she actually believed in making a difference. "Hey," she said, slightly out of breath. "I just wanted to say that what they're doing in there, it is not right. Kellerman is being a complete ass." Reina kept walking. "It is what it is. But you could report it. Hostile work environment or something. I would back you up." Reina stopped and turned to face Hammond. Her gray eyes were calm but distant. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I do not need anyone to fight my battles. This will sort itself out." How? Hammond asked. By letting them mock you until they get bored? Something like that, Raina said. She resumed walking. That afternoon, Raina climbed the wooden stairs to Tower 3 with her gear bag slung over her shoulder. The tower was a plywood box on stilts, reinforced with sandbags and equipped with a radio, binoculars, and a mounted M240 machine gun. The soldier she was relieving looked grateful to be leaving. Anything to report? Raina asked. Whole lot of nothing, he said. Same as every day. He clambered down the stairs with the urgency of someone escaping prison. Raina set up her position with methodical care. She checked the machine gun, confirmed the radio frequencies, scanned the perimeter with the binoculars. The landscape beyond the wire was tan and empty, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush that shimmered in the heat. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the season. She settled into the observer's chair and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with a waterproof cover. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, notes about wind patterns, elevation adjustments, temperature effects on ballistics. At the back were sketches of terrain features, distance estimates, fields of fire. It was the working journal of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about very long-distance shooting. The radio crackled occasionally with routine traffic, patrol movements, supply updates, the daily rhythm of a forward operating base in a quiet sector. Raina listened with half her attention while the other half cataloged the terrain, identifying likely approach routes, calculating ranges to distant features, noting how the wind moved through the valleys. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the sky. Down below, she could see Kellerman moving between buildings, his confidence visible even from this distance. He stopped to talk with soldiers, his gestures animated, and several times she saw groups of men look up toward her tower and laugh. Let them laugh, she thought. Words were just noise, and she had learned long ago, in mountains far higher and more dangerous than these, that the only opinion that mattered was the one backed by performance. When the moment came, and it always did eventually, the truth would speak for itself. Until then, she would wait with the patience that had kept her alive through 3 years of operations that officially never happened. 3 days of tower watch bled together in a haze of heat and isolation. Raina watched the sun rise and set from her elevated perch, listening to radio chatter that rarely involved her, scanning terrain that remained stubbornly empty. Below, the base continued its routines without her. Kellerman's campaign of mockery had evolved from active ridicule to casual dismissal, which somehow felt more complete. She descended from the tower on the 4th morning to find the day room had acquired a new decoration. Someone, almost certainly Kellerman, had created a poster board titled The Hall of Legends. At the top was Raina's name, followed by an absurd list of fictional accomplishments. 47 confirmed kills, 365 unconfirmed. Single-handedly defeated the Taliban using only harsh language. Can hit targets in other time zones. The list continued in that vein, each entry more ridiculous than the last. Soldiers gathered around it throughout the morning, reading entries aloud and adding their own suggestions with markers that had been helpfully provided. Cabrera stood nearby looking uncomfortable, but he did not object. Even Hammond, who had offered support days earlier, merely shook her head and walked past without removing it. Raina stopped in front of the board long enough to read it completely. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She continued to the Chow Hall without comment. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Physical training that morning was a special event. Kellerman had organized a timed run through the obstacle course, complete with full combat loads. He announced it with enthusiasm, explaining that real combat veterans needed to maintain peak conditioning. His eyes found Raina in the formation, and his smile took on an edge. "Let us see who can actually perform under pressure," he said. The course was brutal by design. Over-under obstacles, rope climbs, a wall that required teamwork to scale, crawls through mud under barbed wire. All of it while wearing 40 pounds of gear in heat that was already pushing 90 degrees. Kellerman led the first group, attacking each obstacle with aggressive speed, his muscles straining but his form solid. He finished with a respectable time and stood at the end, hands on his knees, breathing hard but satisfied. Reyna ran in the third group. She moved through the course with an economy of motion that contrasted sharply with Kellerman's power-driven approach. Where others muscled through obstacles, she found efficient paths. Where others rushed and wasted energy, she maintained steady pace. Her breathing never became ragged. At the wall, she scaled it alone while others formed human ladders. At the rope climb, her technique was textbook perfect, legs doing most of the work. She crossed the finish line with the second-best time of the day. Only one other soldier, a specialist who ran cross-country in college, had beaten her. Kellerman's time was fourth. He stared at the board where times were posted, and something dark flickered across his face. Being outperformed by the person he had spent days mocking created a cognitive dissonance he could not quite process. Instead of acknowledgement, he doubled down. Well, he announced loudly, I guess running away is a useful skill for someone who makes up war stories. The formation laughed, but it sounded slightly forced. Cabrera was staring at Reyna with an expression that suggested he was starting to recalculate his assumptions. She stood at the edge of the group, her breathing already returned to normal, and said nothing. That afternoon, Lieutenant Holloway finally received Reyna's personnel file. He sat in his office with the folder open on his desk, reading the same page 3 times because it made no sense. Her training records were exemplary. Expert marksman qualification, advanced reconnaissance courses, survival schools, language training in Pashto and Dari. But her assignment history was a nightmare of redactions. Previous unit assignment, attached, classified operations. Deployment history, redacted. Combat action, redacted. The few sentences that remained intact were frustratingly vague. Sustained operations in denied territory. Extended duration in austere environment. Performance exceeded all expectations. He picked up his phone and called the personnel office at Bagram. I need clarification on a file, he said. Corporal Reyna Thorne. Can you pull her complete record? The sergeant on the other end tapped keys for a moment. Sir, that file is flagged. I cannot access details without special authorization. It shows her current assignment to your location, but previous postings are restricted above my clearance level. What does that mean? Holloway asked. It means someone higher up the chain does not want her history widely distributed, sir. Could be intelligence work, could be special operations liaison, could be a dozen other things. You would need to request access through your S2 shop, and even then it might get denied. Holloway hung up and stared at the folder. A corporal with a classified background. It was unusual, but not unheard of. Intelligence analysts sometimes had restricted files. Translators who worked with sensitive sources. But Reyna's file had the feel of something operational, not analytical. And 47 confirmed kills did not come from sitting in an operations center. He walked out to find Master Sergeant Calvin Ridge, the oldest NCO on base and the closest thing to institutional memory the unit had. Ridge was in the motor pool, supervising maintenance on a Humvee that had been making suspicious noises. The old sergeant was in his mid-40s but looked older, his face weathered by 2 decades of deployments. He had the kind of quiet competence that came from seeing everything twice. Ridge, Holloway said, what do you make of Thorne? Ridge straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. The new corporal with the classified file? You have seen her file? No, sir, but I recognize the type. I have worked with contractors before. CIA, Special Activities Center, those kinds of folks. They move through regular units, sometimes transitioning back to conventional service after their contracts end. The really quiet ones, the ones who do not talk about their work, those are usually the real deal. You think her kill count is legitimate? Ridge shrugged. I think someone spent a lot of effort making sure her background stays buried. That does not happen for people who exaggerate. And I have been watching her. The way she moves, the way she handles her weapon, the way she scans terrain. That is not someone playing pretend, sir. That is someone with hard-earned instincts. Holloway nodded slowly. Kellerman is making her life difficult. Kellerman is an idiot, Ridge said flatly. Good at his job, but too proud to recognize when he is out of his depth. He sees a corporal and assumes she is beneath him. He does not see what she might have done before she became a corporal. Should I intervene? Ridge considered this. Not yet, sir. Let play out a bit longer. Either she will prove herself, or she will not. But my money is on her. I have seen her type before. They do not need defending. They just need opportunity. That evening, in the armory, Reyna requisitioned ammunition for a range session. The supply sergeant, a bored-looking private first class, raised his eyebrows at her request. You want M1 18 LR? He asked. That is sniper-grade stuff. We do not usually issue that for regular practice. I am qualified for it, Reyna said. The private checked his computer. Yeah, I see the authorization here, but still. This is expensive ammo. What are you shooting at? Targets, Reyna said. Her tone suggested the conversation was over. The private shrugged and retrieved the ammunition. As Reyna signed for it, he asked, Is it true you claimed 47 kills? Yes, she said. The private laughed. Man, Kellerman is having a field day with that. Everyone thinks it is hilarious. I'm sure they do, Reyna said. She took the ammunition and left. In her quarters that night, she laid out her gear with ritualistic precision. The modified rifle case, the spotting scope, the range-finding equipment, the custom ammunition loads. Each item was checked, cleaned, and prepared. Tomorrow was her scheduled range time, approved before Kellerman's mockery had begun. It would be the first time anyone on base would see her actually shoot. She did not expect it to change anything. Respect was not earned through demonstrations. But at least it would be something to do besides staring at empty desert from a tower. She loaded her gear bag, set her alarm, and lay down on her bunk. Sleep came easily, as it always did. She had learned long ago in the mountains to take rest wherever she could find it, because you never knew when the next opportunity would come. The range at Forward Operating Base Granite was a strip of dirt and berms carved into the desert about a kilometer from the main compound. Target stands dotted the landscape at varying distances, from 50 meters out to 800. Beyond that, the terrain simply continued into empty wilderness, which made it theoretically possible to shoot at longer ranges if anyone had the equipment and skill to do so. Most soldiers never bothered. Standard infantry engagements rarely exceeded 400 meters, and 800 was considered ambitious. Reyna arrived at dawn carrying her rifle case and gear bag. The range was empty, which was exactly what she had requested when scheduling her time. The range safety officer, a specialist named Torres who looked like he would rather be sleeping, checked her authorization and yawned. You have got the range until on 100, he said. What distance you shooting? Start at 300, she said. Work my way out from there. Torres nodded absently and retreated to the safety shack, where he could monitor from shade. Reyna walked to the firing line and began her setup with methodical precision. The rifle case opened to reveal a weapon that made Torres do a double-take through his binoculars. It was not the standard M4 or even the M110 sniper rifle the designated marksman used. This was something else entirely. A heavily modified bolt-action rifle with a distinctive profile that suggested serious long-range work. The scope mounted on top was easily worth more than a standard service rifle. She assembled her shooting position like an engineer building a bridge. A shooting mat laid precisely. A bipod extended to exact specifications. A small notebook open to a page covered in calculations and environmental notes. A Kestrel weather meter pulled from her bag to check wind speed, temperature, and barometric pressure. She recorded the readings in her notebook with neat handwriting. The sun climbed higher. Heat began radiating off the desert floor in visible waves. Reyna loaded her rifle with the precision ammunition she had requisitioned, each round placed with care. She settled into position behind the weapon, her body forming the relaxed but controlled posture of someone who had done this thousands of times. Her breathing slowed. Her eye found the scope. The 300-meter target appeared in crystal clarity. The first shot cracked across the empty range with authority. Through the spotting scope, Torres saw the hit, center mass on the target. He made a note on his clipboard. Standard enough. The second shot followed 10 seconds later. Another center hit, then a third, fourth, fifth. Every round found the 10 ring with mechanical precision. Reyna stood, adjusted her equipment, and moved her aim to the 500-meter targets. The process repeated. Settle, breathe, calculate, shoot. Each round a perfect expression of ballistic science and human skill. Torres was no longer looking bored. He was actually paying attention now, watching through the powerful spotting scope the range kept for safety monitoring. At 600 meters, she adjusted her scope elevation and made notes about the mirage effect the heat was creating. The targets at this distance were barely visible to the naked eye, small silhouettes that wavered in the thermal distortion. She fired 5 rounds. 5 hits. Torres checked his target log to make sure he was reading the numbers correctly. By the time she moved to the 800 meter line, word had begun to spread. Cabrera arrived first, having heard from Torres over the radio that something interesting was happening at the range. Then Hammond showed up, curious. Within 30 minutes, a small crowd had gathered on the observation berm, watching through whatever optics they could find. Reyna seemed oblivious to the audience. She was locked into her shooting routine, a rhythm that required total focus and excluded external distractions. 800 meters. Adjust for the increased wind at distance. Account for the bullet drop. Calculate the angle. She fired slowly, methodically. Each shot required verification through the spotting scope, adjustment of aim based on observed impact, refinement of technique. Every round hit the target. Not just hit it, but grouped so tightly that the holes overlapped. Torres radioed back to base with an update that brought even more spectators, including several NCOs who wanted to see what the commotion was about. Kellerman arrived with his usual entourage. He stood on the berm with his arms crossed, watching through borrowed binoculars. Someone handed him the target log. His jaw tightened as he read the distances and hit percentages. That is good shooting, he admitted grudgingly. For 800 meters. But 800 is not exactly extreme range. Reyna, still positioned behind her rifle, made an adjustment to her scope. She consulted her notebook, checked her weather meter again, and then scanned the terrain beyond the established targets. There was a rock formation at approximately 1,200 meters, a distinctive boulder about the size of a human torso. She had spotted it earlier and calculated the range using her equipment. Torres, she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the range. I'm going to shoot at that rock formation at 1,200 meters. The large boulder, slightly left of center. Torres looked through his spotting scope, found the rock, and felt his stomach drop. That is way beyond our established range, he said. I'm not sure I can properly observe hits at that distance. I will call my shots, Reyna said. If you can see splash for misses, that will be sufficient. Kellerman laughed from the berm. This should be good. 1,200 meters with iron sights would be a challenge for anyone. Let us see the legend work her magic. Reyna settled back into position. This shot was different. The calculations more complex. Wind at distance was not uniform. It varied in speed and direction through different terrain features. Temperature gradients affected the bullet's flight path. The Earth's rotation became a factor at extreme range. She made notes, cross-referenced data in her book, and entered adjustments into her scope with careful clicks. The crowd on the berm had gone quiet. Even Kellerman had stopped talking. There was something compelling about watching someone attempt something difficult, even if you expected them to fail. Reyna's breathing slowed to the point where it seemed like she might not be breathing at all. Her finger rested on the trigger with feather-light pressure. The moment stretched out, time becoming elastic. Then the rifle cracked. Through the spotting scope, Torres saw the boulder. For a second, nothing. Then dust exploded from its surface, a puff of pulverized stone marking the impact. He keyed his radio with hands that were suddenly less steady. Hit, he transmitted. That was a hit. The berm erupted in surprise conversation. Soldiers turned to each other, confirming what they had seen. Kellerman lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression complicated. Could have been lucky, someone said. Reyna fired again. 10 seconds later, another dust cloud from the boulder. Torres confirmed the second hit. The conversations on the berm died down. She fired a third round. Another hit, then a fourth. By the fifth shot, the boulder's face was visibly scarred even at that distance, a cluster of impacts that spoke to consistency rather than chance. Kellerman walked down from the berm toward the firing line. His face was flushed, whether from sun or emotion was unclear. Torres held up a hand. "Sir, the range is hot. You need to stay behind the line." "I need to see that rifle," Kellerman said. After she is done shooting, Torres replied firmly. Reyna fired 3 more rounds at the distant boulder, each one connecting with the same methodical precision. Then she cleared her weapon, made it safe, and stood. The crowd on the berm had grown to nearly 30 soldiers. Word was spreading through the base like wildfire. Kellerman approached as soon as Torres gave the all-clear. "Let me see that weapon," he said. It was not quite a request. Reyna stepped aside. The rifle lay on the mat, expensive and purposeful. Kellerman examined it without touching, as though contact might burn him. "That is not standard issue," he said. "No," Reyna agreed. "Where did you get it?" "It is mine. Personal equipment approved for deployment." "And the scope?" "That looks like it costs more than my truck." "It does its job," Reyna said. Kellerman straightened. 1,200 meters is impressive. I will give you that. But it is still a controlled environment. No stress, no incoming fire, all the time in the world to calculate your shots. Combat is different. "Yes," Reyna said quietly. "It is." Something in her tone made Kellerman pause. There was no defensiveness, no pride, just a simple acknowledgement that carried weight he could not quite identify. He wanted to say more, to diminish what he had just witnessed, but the words would not come. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the berm where his friends waited with questions he did not want to answer. The intelligence briefing room was cramped and stale, filled with the smell of old coffee and stress. Lieutenant Holloway sat at the head of the table, studying satellite imagery projected on the wall. Taliban activity in the surrounding mountains had increased over the past week. Radio intercepts suggested they were planning something, though exactly what remained unclear. Supply convoys were being harassed with increasing frequency. Observation posts reported more movement at night. The pattern suggested a buildup. Master Sergeant Ridge stood beside the projection, pointing out key terrain features with a laser pointer. "We have identified 3 likely attack routes," he said. "Here, through the northern wadi. Here, along the ridge line to the east. And here, the southern approach through the village ruins. All 3 offer concealment and covered approaches to within effective small arms range of our perimeter." Kellerman leaned forward in his chair. "What is our response posture?" Holloway tapped his pen against the table. "We are reinforcing observation posts and increasing patrol frequency. I want eyes on all 3 approaches around the clock." He paused, then added, "I am also requesting additional sniper support from Bagram." "We have designated marksmen," Kellerman said. "My squad has 2 qualified shooters who can cover those approaches." Ridge exchanged a glance with Holloway. "With respect, Staff Sergeant, designated marksmen are trained for targets out to 600 meters, maybe 800 on a good day. These approaches offer firing positions significantly beyond that range. If the Taliban set up heavy weapons in the high ground, they can hit us from 12 to 1,500 meters. We need someone who can engage at those distances." Kellerman's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. "You're talking about Thorne?" Ridge nodded. "After yesterday's range performance, yes. She has demonstrated capability at extended range that exceeds anything else we have on this base. She shot at rocks in a controlled environment," Kellerman said. "That does not mean she can perform under combat stress. And it still does not explain her claimed kill count." Holloway set down his pen. "I have been trying to get clarification on her file. Her previous assignments are heavily redacted, but everything I can access suggests specialized training and operational experience. Ridge thinks she might be a contractor transitioning back to regular service. Or she could be someone who inflated her resume and got lucky at the range," Kellerman countered. "Sir, with respect, we cannot base our defensive strategy on an unproven corporal with a suspicious background." "She is not unproven," Ridge said quietly. "She's just not proven to you. There is a difference." The tension in the room was palpable. Holloway raised a hand. "Enough. Here is what we're going to do. Thorne will be assigned to Observation Post 7, the position covering the eastern ridgeline approach. That is our most exposed flank and offers the longest sight lines. If she is as good as her range performance suggests, she will be an asset. If not, we will know soon enough. Kellerman, you will coordinate the overall defensive plan. Ridge, you will brief Thorne on her assignment. Kellerman opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. Yes, sir, he said. The briefing continued with tactical details and duty rosters. Kellerman barely listened. His mind was churning through the implications. If Reyna succeeded in the role Ridge was suggesting, it would validate everything she had claimed. If she failed, she might get people killed. Either way, his credibility was now tied to the outcome. He had spent days mocking her, building a consensus that she was a fraud. If she proved him wrong, he would look like a fool. If she proved him right, he would be vindicated, but the base's defensive posture would be compromised. After the briefing, Ridge found Reyna in the chow hall. She was eating alone, as usual, methodically working through her meal while reading a dog-eared paperback. He sat down across from her without asking permission. Corporal Thorne, he said, we need to talk about your new assignment. Reyna set down her book and gave him her full attention. Ridge had the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She had recognized the type immediately, the kind of NCO who had survived multiple deployments through competence rather than luck. You are being assigned to Observation Post 7, Ridge said. It is on the eastern perimeter, elevated position with clear sight lines out to 2,000 meters. Intel suggests possible Taliban activity in that sector. We need someone who can engage targets at extreme range, if necessary. Understood, Reyna said. Ridge studied her face. Yesterday at the range, that was impressive shooting. But shooting at rocks is different than shooting at people. You understand that? Yes, Reyna said. Her voice remained level, but something shifted in her eyes, a shadow that suggested intimate familiarity with the distinction. Your file suggests you have experience with this kind of work, Ridge continued. But it also suggests that experience is classified. I do not need to know the details, but I need to know if you can handle this assignment. Lives may depend on it. I can handle it, Reyna said. Ridge nodded slowly. Kellerman does not trust you. He thinks you're a fraud who got lucky at the range. If something goes wrong, he will use it against you. You understand that? I understand, Reyna said, but I'm not doing this for Kellerman's approval. I am doing it because it is my assignment. Fair enough, Ridge said. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, I have worked with contractors before. CIA types, Special Activities Division, those kinds of folks. They move quiet, they do not talk about their work, and they have skills that seem impossible to regular infantry. You have that same quality. So whatever you did before you showed up here, I believe you did it well. Reyna met his eyes, and for a moment the careful neutrality dropped away. Thank you, she said. That actually means something. Ridge left her to finish her meal. Across the chow hall, Kellerman sat with his usual group, but the conversation was more subdued than normal. Cabrera, the young specialist, had been unusually quiet since the range demonstration. He kept glancing toward Reyna's table with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering his previous assumptions. Hammond, the medic, approached Reyna's table after Ridge left. Can I sit? She asked. Reyna gestured to the empty chair. Hammond sat, but seemed unsure how to begin. Yesterday was impressive, she finally said. I have never seen shooting like that. Thank you, Reyna said. People are starting to talk differently about you. Not everyone, but some. Cabrera told me he thinks maybe you were telling the truth all along. Maybe, Reyna said. She did not sound particularly invested in the outcome of base gossip. Does it bother you? Hammond asked. The way Kellerman has been treating you? Reyna considered the question. It is not pleasant, she said, but I have dealt with worse. Words only have the power you give them, and I stopped caring about proving myself to skeptics a long time ago. The work speaks for itself eventually. That is a healthy attitude, Hammond said. I'm not sure I could be that calm about it. You learn, Reyna said. When you have been in situations where staying calm is the difference between living and dying, everything else becomes manageable by comparison. Is that what it was like? Hammond asked quietly. In your previous assignments? Reyna closed her book and stood, gathering her tray. "Some things are better left in the past," she said. But yes, it was like that. She left Hammond sitting at the table, wondering about the quiet corporal who seemed to carry entire hidden histories in the spaces between her words. Outside, the Afghan sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. Tomorrow, Reyna would take up her new position at Observation Post 7. Tomorrow, the defensive perimeter would be tested. And tomorrow, Kellerman would discover whether his mockery had been justified or whether he had spent 2 weeks ridiculing someone whose skills existed on an entirely different level than his own understanding. The base settled into evening routines, unaware that the Taliban scouts in the surrounding hills had already marked their target and begun their final preparations. The storm was coming, and it would arrive sooner than anyone expected. Observation Post 7 sat on a rocky outcrop that gave commanding views of the eastern approaches to Forward Operating Base Granite. The position consisted of reinforced sandbag walls, a corrugated metal roof for shade, and firing ports that offered protected sight lines across 2 kilometers of broken terrain. Reyna arrived at dawn with her equipment, relieving the night watch who looked exhausted and grateful. The soldier she replaced was a private named Chun who had spent 12 hours staring at empty desert. "Quiet night," he said, gathering his gear. "Same as always. I saw some goat herders around off of 100, but nothing else." He paused at the ladder leading down from the post. "Hey, I heard about your shooting yesterday. That was pretty incredible." "Thank you," Reyna said. Chun hesitated, as though wanting to say more, then simply nodded and descended the ladder. Reyna was alone with the dawn and the vast expanse of terrain that stretched toward distant mountains. She set up her position with the same methodical care she brought to everything. Her modified rifle assembled and function-checked. The powerful spotting scope mounted on a tripod. The range-finding equipment positioned for quick access. Her notebook opened to a fresh page where she began recording environmental conditions. The sun climbed and the temperature with it. Heat waves began rising from the valley floor, creating mirage effects that turned distant objects into wavering uncertainties. Reyna noted the wind direction and speed every 30 minutes, tracking how thermal currents changed as different parts of the terrain heated unevenly. This was data that mattered at extreme range, where a bullet might spend 3 full seconds in flight and travel through multiple wind conditions. Through her spotting scope, she cataloged the terrain with professional thoroughness. A wadi that offered covered approach from the northeast. A cluster of ruins that could conceal infantry. A ridgeline 1,300 meters distant that provided perfect defilade for anyone smart enough to use it. She sketched the positions in her notebook, calculated ranges to key features, and noted potential firing solutions. It was the kind of preparation that came from experience, from understanding that battles were often won by the side that had done better homework. The radio beside her crackled periodically with routine traffic, patrol movements, supply convoys, the normal rhythm of a forward operating base. At 1000 hours, Kellerman's voice came over the net, checking in with all observation posts. 7, this is base. Situation report. Base, this is 7, Reyna replied. All quiet. No movement observed. Visibility good. Copy 7, Kellerman said. His tone was neutral, professional, but she could hear the underlying skepticism. Maintain watch. The hours passed slowly. This was the reality of military service that civilians rarely understood. The endless stretches of boredom punctuated by brief moments of terror. Reyna had learned patience in the mountains, during operations where she might spend days in a single position waiting for a target that might never appear. She knew how to exist in the present moment without restlessness, how to maintain alertness without tension. At 1300 hours, she spotted movement. 3 figures moving along the ridgeline at approximately 1400 meters. She tracked them through the spotting scope, noting their deliberate pace and the way they stayed low. Goat herders moved differently, with less concern for concealment. These were trained fighters conducting reconnaissance. She keyed her radio. Base, this is 7. I have 3 military-age males on the eastern ridgeline, range 1400 meters. They are conducting observation of our position. 7, This is base, Kellerman responded. Can you confirm hostile intent? Negative on hostile intent, Reyna said. But their movement pattern suggests reconnaissance. They are using terrain professionally. Keep eyes on, Kellerman said. Do not engage without authorization. Copy, Reyna replied. She tracked the 3 figures for the next hour as they systematically observed the base's eastern perimeter. They had spotting scopes of their own, and they spent long minutes studying each defensive position. When they finally withdrew, moving back over the ridgeline with the same tactical discipline, Reyna marked their positions in her notebook and estimated the routes they had used. This was preparation for something larger. Reconnaissance preceded action. The timeline might be days or hours, but it was coming. At 1500 hours, Lieutenant Holloway arrived at Observation Post 7, climbing the ladder with evident effort. He was carrying a tactical folder and wearing body armor that made him sweat visibly in the afternoon heat. Corporal, he said, I wanted to check on your position personally. Sir, Reyna said. Holloway studied the observation post setup. Your equipment is impressive. This is your personal gear? Yes, sir. Acquired and maintained at my own expense. Must have cost a fortune, Holloway said. He picked up her notebook and flipped through pages of calculations, environmental notes, and terrain sketches. This is extremely detailed work. Where did you learn to do this? Various places, sir. Different schools and operational experience. Holloway closed the notebook and regarded her with an expression that suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle. Your file is frustrating, Corporal. I have been trying to understand your background for days now. Everything significant is redacted. But Ridge seems to think you are legitimate, and your range performance yesterday was undeniable. So, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you qualified for this assignment? Yes, sir, Reyna said. Kellerman thinks you are a fraud who got lucky, Holloway continued. He thinks placing you here is a risk to base security. Kellerman is entitled to his opinion, sir, Reyna said. But is he right? Reyna met Holloway's eyes. Sir, I've spent 3 years working at distances that make this observation post seem like close quarters. I have made shots in conditions that would be considered impossible by conventional standards. My file is redacted because the operations I supported are still classified. But I can tell you this. I have never missed when lives depended on it, and I do not intend to start now. Holloway held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, he said. I am trusting you, Corporal. If the situation develops, you are authorized to engage any confirmed hostile targets at your discretion. You do not need to wait for my approval. This is your sector, and you have the tactical authority to defend it. Understood, sir, Reyna said. Holloway descended the ladder, leaving her alone again with the heat and the silence. Reyna returned to her spotting scope and continued her watch. The 3 fighters she had observed earlier were gone, but she knew they would return. They had been mapping the base's defenses, calculating fields of fire, identifying weak points. When they came back, it would not be for observation. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Reyna prepared her rifle with particular care. She loaded magazines with her precision ammunition, each round seated with exact pressure. She verified her scope's 0 using a distant reference point. She calculated range cards for every significant terrain feature within 2,000 meters, noting elevation adjustments and wind corrections for each position. The radio traffic increased as the base transitioned to night operations. Guard changes, patrol briefings, the familiar sounds of a military installation preparing for darkness. Kellerman's voice came over the net periodically, coordinating the defensive posture. He sounded confident, in control, but Reyna detected an underlying edge. He was worried about the intelligence reports, worried about the increased Taliban activity, and probably worried about whether the corporal he had spent 2 weeks mocking was actually capable of doing her job. Night fell completely, and the base's lights created a perimeter of illumination against the vast darkness of the Afghan landscape. Reyna switched to her night vision equipment, scanning the eastern approaches with methodical thoroughness. The terrain appeared in shades of green, shadows becoming pools of deeper darkness where threats could hide. At 2200 hours, Her radio crackled with sudden urgency. All stations, this is base. We have reports of possible enemy movement in multiple sectors. Increase alert status. All observation posts switch to weapons tight, but be prepared for immediate action. Reyna acknowledged the transmission and settled more firmly into her position. Her hand rested on her rifle, her eye found the scope, and her breathing steadied into the rhythm that preceded action. Somewhere in the darkness beyond her position, fighters were moving toward the base with intentions that would soon become violent. The reconnaissance had been completed. The attack was beginning, and Corporal Reyna Thorne, the woman Kellerman had called a fraud and a legend in mockery, was about to demonstrate exactly what 3 years of classified operations in the mountains had taught her about the precise application of violence at extreme range. The attack came at 0 for 30, in that dead hour before dawn when human alertness reached its lowest ebb. Reyna heard it before she saw it, the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoing across the valley from the southern perimeter. The radio erupted with voices overlapping in controlled chaos. Contact south. Multiple hostiles. Heavy weapons fire. The base's alarm system wailed into life, drowning out the natural sounds of the desert night. Reyna remained focused on her sector. An attack from the south could be a feint, designed to draw attention while the main assault came from another direction. She scanned the eastern approaches through her night vision, methodical and thorough. The green-tinted landscape remained empty for 30 seconds, then a minute. More radio traffic. The southern observation post was taking sustained fire. Casualties reported. Kellerman's voice cut through the chatter, coordinating the response with clipped professional efficiency. Then she saw them. Movement on the ridgeline, exactly where the reconnaissance team had been observing from the previous day. For figures cresting the high ground, backlit momentarily against the marginally lighter sky. They were carrying heavy weapons, the distinctive profiles of PCAM machine guns unmistakable even at distance. Behind them, more fighters appeared. Then more. This was not a probing attack. This was a coordinated assault with at least 15 hostiles in her sector alone. 7. This is Base, Kellerman transmitted. Situation report. Base 7. I have multiple hostiles on the eastern ridge. Count at least 15 fighters with crew-served weapons. Range 1,300 to 1,500 meters. They're setting up firing positions. There was a pause on the radio. 1,300 meters? Kellerman said. Are you certain? Affirmative, Reyna replied. I have positive identification through night vision. They are preparing to engage. 7. Hold position, Kellerman said. Wait for them to come into effective range before engaging. Negative, Base, Reyna said, her voice calm but firm. They are already in effective range. Request permission to engage. 7. Your weapon cannot reach that far effectively, Kellerman said. Wait until they close to 800 meters. Base, I am authorized by Lieutenant Holloway to engage at my discretion, Reyna replied. I am engaging now. She switched her radio to the command frequency, knowing Holloway would be monitoring. Sir, this is 7. I have hostile forces establishing positions on the eastern ridge at extreme range. I am engaging to disrupt their setup before they can coordinate with the southern assault. Do it, Holloway transmitted immediately. Reyna's world narrowed to the fundamentals. She had already calculated the range to the ridgeline positions during her daylight reconnaissance. 1,420 meters to the nearest machine gun team. Wind was calm at ground level, but she knew from experience that winds at altitude could be different. She made rapid adjustments to her scope, clicks of elevation and windage that came from muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions. The first machine gun team was setting up their weapon, 2 men working to position the tripod, while a third prepared ammunition belts. They felt safe at this distance, beyond the effective range of anything the Americans typically deployed at a forward operating base. They were wrong. Reyna controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow despite the chaos on the radio. Her finger found the trigger with the light pressure of long practice. The crosshairs settled on the gunner as he bent over his weapon. She calculated lead for any potential movement, confirmed her hold, and pressed straight back. The rifle cracked, the recoil pushing into her shoulder with familiar authority. Through her scope, she watched the bullets impact with the detached precision of a professional. The gunner collapsed, his body falling across the machine gun he had been preparing. The other two fighters froze in confusion, unable to immediately comprehend what had happened. They were too far away to have heard the shot. To them, their companion had simply fallen. Reyna worked her bolt, chambering another round with smooth efficiency. The process was automatic, leaving her conscious mind free to focus on the target. She shifted her aim to the second man, who was now reaching for his fallen comrade. The crosshairs settled. Another control press. Another crack. The second man went down. The third fighter finally understood. He abandoned the machine gun and tried to scramble behind the rocks. Reyna led him by 2 body widths, accounting for his movement and the bullet's flight time. Her third shot caught him mid-stride. He tumbled and went still. "Base, this is 7, she transmitted, her voice betrayingly calm. 3 hostiles down at 1420 meters. The eastern machine gun position is neutralized." The radio was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Kellerman's voice, stripped of its earlier confidence. "Say again, 7. Did you say 1400 meters?" "Affirmative," Reyna replied. She was already scanning for the next threat. The other fighters on the ridgeline had witnessed what happened, but were struggling to understand the geometry of the situation. They knew their position was being engaged, but the range seemed impossible. A second machine gun team was setting up further north along the ridgeline, attempting to use a different position. Range 1490 meters. Reyna adjusted her scope, calculated the slightly different angle and elevation, and engaged. The process repeated with mechanical precision. Settle, breathe, press. The machine gunner fell. His assistant tried to take over the weapon. Another shot. Another hit. The Taliban assault began to falter. The fighters on the ridgeline were taking fire from a source they could not identify or return fire against. Some went to ground behind inadequate cover. Others tried to withdraw. Reyna tracked each movement with professional detachment, selecting targets based on threat priority. Anyone carrying a heavy weapon, anyone with radio equipment, anyone attempting to coordinate the others. Her rifle worked like a metronome. Load, aim, fire. Work the bolt. The brass casings ejected and clinked against the observation post's metal floor, creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant chaos of the southern engagement. Each shot was independent, each target assessed on its own merits. But together they created a systematic dismantling of the Eastern Assault Force. Ridge's voice came over the command frequency. 7. This is Master Sergeant Ridge. What is your ammunition status? Sufficient, Reyna replied. I am managing my rate of fire. Copy. Continue mission. You are relieving pressure on the southern sector by keeping their support element pinned. The word pinned was generous. The Eastern Assault Force was not pinned. It was being eliminated. Bodies littered the ridgeline where moments before there had been an organized attack force. The survivors were breaking, abandoning their positions, and retreating over the high ground. Reyna let them go. Shooting fleeing fighters was legally justified, but tactically unnecessary. The threat was neutralized. She shifted her attention to the Wadi approach, where she had spotted additional movement during her earlier observations. 3 fighters were attempting to use the covered route to get closer to the base. They were at 1,100 meters, moving in bounds with tactical discipline. Reyna adjusted her aim and engaged the lead fighter. He went down. The other 2 froze, trying to identify where the fire was coming from. She engaged the second fighter. Another hit. The third abandoned any pretense of tactical movement and ran. She let him go. Base, this is 7, she transmitted. Eastern sector is clear. All hostile positions neutralized or withdrawn. I count 8 confirmed at range, 2 more probable. No hostiles within effective engagement range of the base perimeter. Kellerman's response was delayed, as though he was struggling to process the information. Copy 7. Maintain observation. The southern engagement is still active. Reyna reloaded her magazine and continued scanning her sector. The eastern ridgeline was quiet now, the pre-dawn darkness hiding the evidence of what had occurred there. To anyone observing from the base, it would have seemed like nothing had happened in the eastern sector. No tracers streaking through the darkness. No explosions. Just a series of barely audible cracks from observation post 7. Sounds that could have been mistaken for anything or nothing. But Reyna knew the truth. 8 fighters down at ranges between 1,100 and 1,500 meters, each shot taken under combat stress. Each hit confirmed through her optics. The eastern assault had been stopped before it could develop, stopped by a corporal that half the base had spent 2 weeks calling fraud. The irony was not lost on her, but she felt no satisfaction. There was only the familiar weight that came with taking human lives, a weight that numbers could never adequately capture. 47 had become 55. The count continued, each addition making the total feel more burdensome rather than less. The sun rose over forward operating base Granite to reveal a compound transformed by violence. Smoke drifted from damaged structures on the southern perimeter where the Taliban's main assault had concentrated. Medics moved between positions, treating wounded. The engineering team was already assessing damage to defensive walls. 3 American soldiers had been wounded, none critically. The base had held, but the cost and tension and exhaustion showed on every face. Lieutenant Holloway stood in the Tactical Operations Center reviewing after-action reports with Ridge beside him. The southern engagement had been fierce, but ultimately unsuccessful. The Taliban had thrown approximately 30 fighters at that sector, supported by RPGs and heavy machine guns. The American response had been effective, if costly in ammunition and nerves. But it was the eastern sector that had everyone talking. Kellerman entered the operations center carrying a tactical map marked with engagement positions. His face was drawn, his usual confidence replaced by something harder to read. "Sir," he said to Holloway, "I need to conduct a battle damage assessment on the eastern ridgeline. We need to verify Corporal Thorne's reported kills." Holloway looked up from his reports. "Is that necessary?" Her transmissions during the engagement were clear and consistent. She reported 8 confirmed. "Sir, with respect," Kellerman said slowly, "she reported engaging targets at ranges that should not be possible under combat conditions. At night, with fighters who were actively preparing to attack. I need to verify those claims before they go into the official record." Ridge crossed his arms. "You think she's still lying? Even after what we heard on the radio?" "I think we need to verify," Kellerman said. His tone was defensive. "It is standard procedure for any engagement to confirm kills and assess enemy casualties. This is not about Thorne specifically, but it is," Ridge said quietly. "You have been calling her a fraud for 2 weeks. Now she just did something remarkable, and you cannot accept it without seeing proof." "I want to see the bodies," Kellerman said flatly. "Is that so unreasonable?" Holloway considered this. "Actually, no. We should conduct a proper assessment anyway, for intelligence purposes. Take a patrol out there once we have confirmed the area is clear. Bring a camera and document everything. Thorne will accompany you to identify positions." Kellerman nodded stiffly and left. Ridge watched him go with an expression of mixed sympathy and frustration. "He is struggling," Ridge said. "His entire worldview just got challenged. Give him time to process it, or he will find some way to dismiss it," Holloway said. "Some people cannot admit when they are wrong. It threatens their identity too much." "We will know soon enough," Ridge replied. 2 hours later, Reyna descended from observation post 7 for the first time since the engagement. She had maintained her watch through dawn and into morning, ensuring the eastern approaches remained clear. Chun, the private who normally manned the position, relieved her with obvious awe. "I heard what you did," he said as they passed on the ladder. "That was incredible. Just doing my job," Reyna said. She was exhausted in the way that came from sustained alertness rather than physical exertion. Her eyes felt gritty, her mind operating with a slight delay that marked serious fatigue. Kellerman met her at the base of the observation post with a full squad in patrol formation. "Corporal," he said, "you are coming with us to assess the engagement area. We need you to identify positions." "Understood," Reyna said. She checked her rifle and joined the patrol. The walk to the eastern ridgeline took 40 minutes, moving carefully through terrain that could still conceal threats. The morning sun was already heating the desert, promising another day of brutal temperatures. They reached the ridgeline where the 1st machine gun team had set up. The scene was stark and undeniable. 3 bodies lay where they had fallen, the heavy machine gun still on its partially assembled tripod. Blood had soaked into the rocky ground, already drying to brown stains in the heat. Shell casings from Reyna's rifle littered the observation post behind them, barely visible at this range. Kellerman walked the position slowly, his camera documenting everything. He knelt beside the machine gun and examined the weapon. This was ready to fire, he said. Another minute, and they would have been engaging the base. Range 1,420 meters, Reyna said quietly. She pointed back toward observation post 7, a tiny structure barely visible in the distance. Kellerman looked at the observation post, then at the bodies, then back at the observation post. He said nothing, but his jaw worked as though chewing words too difficult to speak. The patrol moved north along the ridgeline, finding more bodies at measured intervals. Each position told the same story. Fighters killed at impossible ranges with single shots. At the 4th position, Specialist Cabrera spoke up. "Staff Sergeant, these are all headshots or center mass. At over 1,300 meters. In the dark, during an active engagement." He looked at Reyna with something approaching disbelief. "How is that even possible?" "Training," Reyna said simply. "And experience." "What kind of training?" Cabrera asked. "The classified kind," Ridge said. He had accompanied the patrol and was conducting his own assessment. He examined one of the fallen fighters' weapons, noting the quality of their equipment. These were not amateurs. They had good gear and they knew how to use it. They just encountered someone better. The patrol reached the final positions where Reyna had engaged fighters in the Wadi approach. 2 more bodies, both killed at 1,100 meters while moving through terrain that should have provided concealment. Kellerman photographed everything with mechanical precision, his face an unreadable mask. As they began the return journey to base, Kellerman finally broke his silence. "A confirmed," he said, "all at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Most over 1,300, under night conditions with active combat stress." He paused, then forced out the next words. "I have never seen anything like it. I did not think it was possible." "It is possible when you have done it enough times," Reyna said. "When the fundamentals become automatic and you can focus entirely on execution." "How many times have you done it?" Kellerman asked. "Enough that I stopped being impressed with myself," Reyna replied. Her voice carried a weight that suggested the number was higher than anyone wanted to contemplate. The patrol walked in silence for several minutes. Finally, Kellerman spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I owe you an apology." He did not look at her, keeping his eyes on the terrain ahead. "I spent 2 weeks making you the butt of every joke on base. I called you a fraud. I convinced half the unit that you were lying about your record. And last night, you saved lives because you were exactly what you claimed to be." "You were skeptical," Reyna said. "That is natural. My father does not give people much reason to believe me." "It was not just skepticism," Kellerman said. "It was ego. I cannot accept that someone might be better than me at something I pride myself on. Especially not a corporal. Especially not someone I did not know. So I tried to tear you down to protect my own sense of superiority. That was wrong." Reyna considered this. "Apology accepted," she said. "But understand something. I do not share my kill count because I am proud of it. I carry it. Every single one. 47 before last night, 55 now. That is 55 people who are dead because I was good at my job. Some of them probably deserved it. Some of them were just fighting for what they believed in. Either way, they are gone. So when you mock that number, you are not just questioning my competence. You're trivializing something that cost me sleep and peace of mind." Kellerman finally looked at her. "I understand," he said. "And I am sorry. Truly." They walked the rest of the way in contemplative silence. Behind them, the eastern ridgeline held its dead under the merciless Afghan sun, silent testament to the reality that some people's capabilities existed far beyond the boundaries of normal expectation. The legend was real, and her skills were written in the permanent ink of combat results. Now everyone knew it, and that knowledge would change everything about how the base functioned and how they looked at the quiet corporal who preferred to stand at the edges of rooms and let her work speak for itself. Word spread through forward operating base Granite like wildfire through dry brush. By the time the patrol returned from the eastern ridgeline, every soldier on base had heard some version of what had happened. The quiet corporal that Kellerman had mocked for 2 weeks had single-handedly stopped an entire assault element at ranges that seemed more fiction than fact. The photographs Kellerman brought back, the documented distances, the undeniable evidence of precision under impossible conditions, all of it circulated through the base with the weight of revelation. The Hall of Legends board in the day room was gone by afternoon. No one admitted to removing it, but its absence spoke volumes. The joke stopped. The sarcastic nickname faded. When Reyna walked through the compound, soldiers stepped aside with something that looked uncomfortably like deference. Some nodded respectfully. Others stared with barely concealed awe. A few tried to speak to her, but seemed uncertain what to say. She hated it almost as much as the mockery. Hammond found her in the Chow Hall that evening, sitting alone as usual, but with a different quality to the solitude. Before, she had been isolated by ridicule. Now, she was isolated by reputation. The medic sat down without asking, just as she had weeks earlier. "Everyone is talking about you," Hammond said. "I know," Reyna replied quietly. "They are calling you a hero, saying you saved the whole base." "That is an exaggeration," Reyna said. "The southern defenses would have held even without my sector. I just made the eastern approach too costly to continue." "That is not what Kellerman is saying," Hammond offered. "He has been telling everyone that your shooting was the most incredible thing he has ever witnessed. He showed me the pictures, the distances involved." She shook her head in disbelief. "I still do not understand how you did it." "Practice," Reyna said. "Thousands of hours of practice. And 3 years of doing nothing else." "The mysterious classified assignments," Hammond said. "That is what you were doing. Long-range precision shooting in the mountains." "Something like that," Reyna agreed. "People are asking questions about your background, your training, how you learned to shoot like that. You know you do not have to answer them, right?" "I know," Reyna said, "and I will not. Some things are better left classified." Cabrera approached their table, hesitant but determined. He was carrying his tray and wore an expression of nervous resolve. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "It is a free country," Reyna said. Cabrera sat and immediately launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you when you first arrived. I laughed at Kellerman's jokes. I thought the whole thing was funny. I never considered that you might actually be telling the truth. That was ignorant and disrespectful, and I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Reyna said. "Can I ask you something?" Cabrera said. "When you were taking those shots last night, what was going through your head? Were you scared? Excited? How do you stay that calm?" Reyna set down her fork and considered the question. "Fear is natural," she said, "but fear clouds judgment. So you train until the fundamentals are automatic. Your body knows what to do even when your mind is processing the chaos. As for excitement, there is none. Taking a life is never exciting. It is necessary sometimes, but never exciting. What goes through my head is data. Wind speed, range, elevation, target movement. Everything else is noise that I filter out." "That sounds lonely," Hammond said quietly. "It is," Reyna admitted, "but it is also the job. Someone has to be willing to make those shots. Someone has to carry that weight. If it is not me, it would be someone else. And that person would carry the same burden." The three of them ate in companionable silence for a while. Other soldiers glanced their way, clearly wanting to approach, but uncertain of the reception they would receive. Finally, Cabrera spoke again. "Kellerman wants to know if you would be willing to train the designated marksman. Share some of your techniques. He says the request is official, but he wanted me to ask you first, unofficially. I think he is afraid you will refuse if he asks directly." "I will do it," Reyna said. "Training improves unit capability. It is part of my responsibility." "Even after how he treated you?" Hammond asked. "Especially after how he treated me," Reyna said. "Kellerman made a mistake, but he had the courage to admit it. That takes strength. I respect that more than if he had been right from the beginning. People who can acknowledge their errors and change their behavior are worth investing in. That is a remarkably mature perspective, Hammond said. It is a survival perspective, Reyna corrected. Holding grudges in combat zones gets people killed. We either work together effectively or we fail together completely. I prefer the former. Lieutenant Holloway found her after dinner. He was carrying a folder and wearing his serious command face. "Corporal Thorne," he said, "I need to speak with you privately." They walked to his office, a cramped space filled with maps and operational documents. Holloway closed the door and gestured to a chair. "Your performance last night was exemplary," he began. "I have submitted you for a commendation, but I also need to discuss your status going forward." "Sir," Reyna said, "your file came back with additional information after I made some persistent requests," Holloway said. "I now understand that you are actually a GS-12 civilian contractor transitioning back to military service. Your corporal rank is administrative, a holding position while your paperwork processes. Your actual experience level is significantly higher than your rank suggests." "That is correct, sir," Reyna said. "I also learned that your contract work was with the Special Activities Center, embedded with indigenous forces in the Hindu Kush for 3 years. Your primary role was counter-leadership targeting at extreme range. 31 high-value targets eliminated with your previous organization before your 47 total. Is that accurate?" "It is," Reyna said. Holloway leaned back in his chair. "So when you told Kellerman you had 47 confirmed kills, you were actually understating your experience. The previous 16 were under different circumstances," Reyna said. "Different chain of command, different rules of engagement. I did not think they were relevant to conventional military service." Holloway rubbed his face tiredly. "Corporal, you just stopped an assault force single-handedly using skills that 99% of the military does not possess. You have been working in the most demanding environment imaginable for 3 years. And for 2 weeks, we treated you like a joke." He looked genuinely pained. "On behalf of this command, I apologize. You deserve better." "I have dealt with worse," Reyna said. "That does not make it acceptable," Holloway replied. "Going forward, I want you to take a leadership role in our defensive preparations. Work with Kellerman, train the designated marksmen, improve our long-range capabilities. Your expertise is exactly what this base needs." "I will do whatever the mission requires, sir," Reyna said. "Good," Holloway said. "Dismissed." "And, Corporal?" He paused as she stood. "Thank you for not holding our ignorance against us, for doing your job despite the hostile environment we created. That shows character." Reyna nodded and left the office. Outside, the base was settling into evening routines. The temperature was dropping, and soldiers were gathering in small groups, talking and laughing with the relief that came from surviving danger. She saw Kellerman across the compound, standing with Ridge and reviewing what looked like training schedules. He glanced her way and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Not friendship exactly, but respect. She returned to her quarters and sat on her bunk, the day's events replaying in her mind. 55 confirmed kills now. Each face remembered, each circumstance cataloged in the mental ledger she kept. The number had grown again, and with it the weight she carried. People saw the skill and were impressed. They saw the results and called it heroic. But they did not see the cost. They did not understand that every number represented a moment of irrevocable finality, a life ended by her decision and her skill. She pulled out her journal and added 8 new entries. Date, time, location, circumstances. The permanent record of actions taken and lives ended. When she finished writing, she closed the journal and locked it away. Tomorrow she would begin training the designated marksman. Tomorrow she would help improve the base's defensive capabilities. Tomorrow she would continue the mission. But tonight, she sat alone with her thoughts and the quiet understanding that competence and recognition were poor compensation for the burden of being exceptional at taking human life. The training began 3 days after the engagement. Reyna stood at the range with 6 designated marksmen arranged in a semicircle around her. Kellerman was among them, having volunteered to participate despite his senior rank. The morning air was still cool, offering a brief reprieve before the heat became oppressive. She had prepared for this session with the same methodical care she brought to everything, organizing her thoughts and creating a progression that would maximize learning. The fundamentals are simple, she began. Her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the desert silence. Breathing, trigger control, sight picture, and follow-through. Everything else builds on those four elements. If you master them, extreme range becomes possible. If you neglect them, even close shots become inconsistent. She demonstrated each element slowly, exaggerating the movements so they could observe. Her breathing pattern, the smooth pressure on the trigger, the way her eye remained focused through the scope even after the shot broke. Then she had them practice dry firing, correcting small errors in form that most would never notice, but that became critical at distance. Cabrera was eager but rushed his trigger press. Reina placed her hand over his and guided him through the motion at half speed. Feel how the pressure builds gradually, she said. No sudden movements. Your finger should surprise you when the shot breaks. A specialist named Morrison had trouble with his breathing. Reina knelt beside him and placed her hand on his chest. You're holding your breath too long. That creates tension and increases your heart rate. Breathe naturally, then pause at the natural bottom of your exhale. That is your window. Kellerman watched these interactions with focused intensity. When his turn came for individual coaching, Reina studied his position critically. Your form is solid, she said, but you're muscling the rifle. At extreme range, you cannot force precision. You have to allow it. Relax your grip slightly. Let the rifle settle naturally. He made the adjustment and fire practice round. The result was noticeably better. Kellerman looked at the target, then at Reina. That is a subtle difference, he said, but I can feel it. The subtle differences accumulate, Reina replied. A millimeter of error at the muzzle becomes a meter of error at 1,000 meters. Everything matters. They worked through the morning, progressing from dry fire to live rounds at 300 meters, then 500. Reina moved between shooters, offering corrections and encouragement in equal measure. She had a gift for identifying exactly what each person was doing wrong and explaining the correction in terms they could understand. Morrison needed mechanical explanations. Cabrera responded to visual imagery. Kellerman required logical progressions. By midday, the improvement was visible. Groups tightened. Confidence increased. The designated marksmen were not reaching Reina's level, and never would without years of dedicated practice, but they were becoming measurably better than they had been. During a water break, Ridge arrived to observe. He stood on the berm watching Reina coach Morrison through a difficult shot at 600 meters. When Morrison hit the target, Ridge nodded approvingly. This is good work, he said to Holloway, who had joined him. She is a natural instructor. She understands that teaching is not about showing off, Holloway replied. It is about meeting people where they are and bringing them forward. That is rare. On the range, Kellerman approached Reina during a lull. Can I ask you something? He said. About the other night. When you were taking those shots in the dark, were you afraid? Reina considered the question. Fear was present, she said, but it was not in control. I have been in similar situations enough times that the fear became background noise. Like tinnitus. Always there, but possible to ignore when focus is required. I have 12 confirmed kills, Kellerman said quietly. Each one stays with me. I remember their faces when I close my eyes. How do you carry 55? You do not carry them well, Reina said. You just carry them. Some nights are harder than others. Some faces are clearer than others. You learn to function despite the weight because the alternative is to collapse under it, and that serves no one. Do you regret it? Any of them? Reina looked out across the empty desert. Regret implies I would make a different choice if given the opportunity. For most of them, I would not. They were threats to people I was responsible for protecting. Eliminating them was the correct tactical decision. But that does not mean I am comfortable with it. Tactical correctness and moral comfort are not the same thing. That is a hard way to live, Kellerman said. It is the price of competence, Reina replied. The better you are at something, the more often you are asked to do it. And in our profession, being good means taking lives efficiently. That creates a particular kind of burden. The training resumed after the break. Reina introduced wind reading, teaching them to observe mirage effects and vegetation movement to estimate wind speed and direction. She showed them how wind at the shooter's position was often different from wind at the target, and how to factor that into their calculations. The concepts were complex, but she broke them into digestible pieces, building understanding incrementally. At 800 meters, she set up a demonstration. This is approximately the maximum effective range for your weapons and current skill level, she explained. Beyond this, the variables become exponentially more complex. But if you master 800 meters, you will be effective in 90% of engagement scenarios. She fired 3 rounds, grouping them in a pattern small enough to cover with her hand. Then she invited each marksman to attempt the same shot. The results varied widely, but everyone hit the target somewhere, which represented significant progress from where they had started. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Reina called the training to a close. "You have all improved significantly today," she said. "But improvement is not mastery. Mastery requires repetition until the fundamentals become unconscious. I want each of you to spend 30 minutes daily on dry fire practice. Focus on trigger control and breathing. The live fire will come easier if the basics are automatic." The designated marksman thanked her with genuine appreciation. Even Kellerman, who had arrived that morning with visible discomfort about being trained by someone he had mocked, seemed genuinely grateful. "That was excellent instruction," he said. "I learned more today than in my last 2 qualification cycles combined." "You were receptive to learning," Reina said. "That matters more than the instruction quality. A good student can learn from a mediocre teacher. A poor student will struggle even with excellent teaching." "Will you continue the training?" Kellerman asked. "Make it a regular program?" "If that is what the command wants," Reina said. "I am here to serve the mission." After everyone else had left, Ridge approached Reina as she was cleaning her equipment. "You did well today," he said. "Teaching is harder than doing. You have a gift for it." "I had good teachers," Reina replied. "I am just passing along what was given to me." "Your previous organization," Ridge said, "they must have invested heavily in your development. That level of skill does not come cheap or easy." 3 years of intensive work, Reina said, every day dedicated to becoming better at one specific task. It was immersive in a way that regular military training cannot replicate. When your entire existence revolves around precision shooting in mountain environments, you either excel or you fail. There is no middle ground. And now you are here, teaching corporals and specialists the basics, Ridge said. That must feel like a step backward. Reina secured her rifle case and stood. "It feels like exactly what I should be doing," she said. "Those skills have limited application in the civilian world. Here, they can keep people alive. That gives them purpose beyond the kill count. That makes the burden slightly easier to carry." She walked back toward the compound as the sun painted the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Behind her, the range was empty except for the targets, their surfaces pocked with bullet holes that told stories of incremental improvement and hard-won skill. The designated marksmen would never reach her level, but they would be better than they were. And in a combat zone, better was often the difference between survival and catastrophe. That was enough. It had to be enough. The transformation of Forward Operating Base Granite was subtle but pervasive. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere shifted from the casual mockery that had defined Reina's arrival to something approaching professional respect. The designated marksman training became a regular fixture, with soldiers from other squads requesting permission to participate. Reina's quiet competence earned her a reputation that spread beyond the base itself, carried by supply convoys and radio chatter to other installations across the province. Kellerman's transformation was perhaps the most visible. He threw himself into the training with the dedication of someone seeking redemption through excellence. His shooting improved markedly, and with it came a humility that had been absent before. He began deferring to Reina on matters of long-range engagement, and more surprisingly, he began publicly correcting soldiers who still harbored doubts about her capabilities. One afternoon in the Chow Hall, Reyna overheard a newly arrived lieutenant questioning her credentials. I heard she claimed some ridiculous kill count, the lieutenant said to Kellerman. Sounds like another case of stolen valor to me. Kellerman's response was immediate and forceful. Sir, with respect, Corporal Thorne has more confirmed kills than everyone in this mess hall combined. I have personally verified her combat performance. If you doubt her capabilities, I would be happy to arrange a demonstration that will embarrass you. The lieutenant backed down quickly, and Kellerman caught Reyna's eye across the room. She gave him a slight nod of acknowledgement. The man who had created the Hall of Legends mockery board was now her most vocal defender. The irony was not lost on either of them. Ridge found Reyna on the observation tower one evening as the sun set over the mountains. He climbed the ladder with the careful movements of someone whose knees had seen too many deployments. Mind if an old soldier interrupts your solitude? He asked. Not at all, Master Sergeant, Reyna said. Ridge settled into the observer's chair with a grunt. I wanted to tell you something before you move on from here. Your orders came through today. You are being reassigned to Bugram next month for your transition back to active duty. They are putting you through for sergeant, which is criminally low given your experience, but it is better than corporal. I appreciate you telling me, Reyna said. I also wanted to say that what you did here mattered, Ridge continued. Not just the shooting, though that was impressive, but the way you handled Kellerman's treatment. The way you turned mockery into mentorship. A lesser person would have held a grudge or demanded justice. You just quietly proved yourself and then helped others improve. That is leadership. I was just trying to get through each day, Reyna said. That is what leadership looks like in the real world, Ridge replied. Not grand gestures or inspiring speeches. Just competent people doing their jobs despite difficult circumstances and lifting others up when possible. You reminded this old sergeant why I stayed in so long. To work with people like you. Reyna felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. They sat in companionable silence, watching the desert turn purple in the fading light. Finally, Ridge spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Those 55 kills. How do you make peace with that number? I do not, Reyna said. Making peace with it would feel like dismissing the weight of what I have done. Those were people. They had families, beliefs, reasons for fighting. I was just better at violence than they were. So instead of peace, I aim for acceptance. I accept that this is who I am and what I have done. I try to use these skills in ways that serve something larger than myself. And I remember every single one so that their deaths are not reduced to statistics. That is a heavy burden for someone so young, Ridge said. Age is relative, Reyna replied. I feel much older than my years suggest. That evening, Kellerman invited Reyna to join his squad for dinner. It was the first time she had been included in any social gathering that was not purely professional. The group was subdued initially, uncertain how to interact with someone who existed in a category beyond their experience. But gradually, conversation flowed. War stories were exchanged. Jokes were told. Reyna remained mostly quiet, listening more than speaking, but her presence was no longer a source of tension. Cabrera asked about her previous assignments. What was it like? He asked. Working alone in the mountains with indigenous forces? Isolating, Reyna said, but focused. Every day had a single purpose. Find a target, verify the identification, wait for the right moment, execute the shot. There was clarity in that simplicity. No politics, no personality conflicts. Just the mission. Did you ever miss? Morrison asked. Twice, Reyna said. Once because the target moved at the exact moment I fired. Once because I miscalculated wind at altitude. Both targets survived and escaped. Those failures bother me more than the successes. Not because I wanted them dead, but because a failure meant all that preparation and risk were wasted. What happened to you afterward? Hammond asked. After the misses? I went back to work, Reyna said. Analyzed what went wrong, adjusted my techniques, and tried again. Failure is only permanent if you let it be. Otherwise, it is just expensive education. The conversation continued late into the evening. As people began to drift away, Kellerman remained. I need to say something, he told Reyna. When you first arrived, I was threatened by you. Not consciously, but looking back, that is what it was. You represented something I did not understand and could not control. So I tried to diminish you to make myself feel superior. That was cowardice dressed up as skepticism. You already apologized, Rhaenys said. I know, Kellerman replied. But I wanted to thank you as well. For not just accepting my apology, but for actually helping me become better. You could have refused to train me. You had every reason to, but you did not. That showed character I aspire to. We all have moments we regret, Rhaenys said. What matters is what we do afterward. You chose to learn and grow. That takes courage too. Kellerman stood to leave, then paused. For what it is worth, I will never forget what you did during that engagement. The way you stayed calm while the radio was chaos. The way every shot counted. That was the most professional performance I have ever witnessed. After he left, Rhaena remained in the empty chow hall for a few minutes, processing the evening. The journey from mockery to respect had been long and uncomfortable, but had also been instructive. People feared what they did not understand. They diminished what threatened them. But given time and evidence, most could overcome their prejudices and grow. Not everyone, but enough to matter. She walked back to her quarters under a sky full of stars. In a month, she would leave this base and these people behind. New assignments awaited, new challenges and new burdens to carry. But she would take with her the knowledge that even in difficult circumstances, with hostile reception and constant mockery, competence and character eventually prevailed. Not through confrontation or demands for respect, but through quiet consistency and the willingness to help others even when they had not earned it. That was the lesson Forward Operating Base Granite had taught her, and it was a lesson worth remembering as she moved forward into whatever came next. The morning of Rhaena's departure arrived with the same relentless sun that had marked every day at Forward Operating Base Granite. She packed her equipment with the methodical precision that had become her signature, each item checked and secured in its designated place. The modified rifle went into its case. The spotting scope wrapped carefully in protective foam. The notebooks filled with calculations and observations stacked in waterproof containers. 3 months of her life reduced to duffel bags and hard cases. Lieutenant Holloway found her in her quarters as she was doing a final sweep. Your transport leaves at on 100, he said. But I wanted to speak with you before you go. Yes, sir, Rhaenys said. Your commendation was approved, Holloway continued. Bronze Star with Valor device for your actions during the engagement. It will be processed through Bagram and should catch up with you at your next duty station. He paused. I also submitted a recommendation that you be considered for advanced sniper instructor positions. Someone with your skills and teaching ability should be developing the next generation, not just executing missions. I appreciate that, sir, Rhaenys said. Holloway extended his hand. You made this base better, Corporal. Not just safer, but better. You showed us what professionalism looks like even in hostile circumstances. That is a lesson this command needed to learn. They shook hands, and Holloway left her to finish packing. Rhaena secured the last of her gear and carried it outside where a Humvee waited to transport her to the helicopter landing zone. A small crowd had gathered, which surprised her. Kellerman stood at the front with his squad. Ridge was there with several other NCOs. Hammond and Cabrera represented the enlisted soldiers she had trained and worked alongside. Kellerman stepped forward first. We wanted to see you off properly, he said. You changed this place. Changed us. That deserves recognition. You all did the changing yourselves, Rhaenys said. I just provided information. What you did with it was your choice. You provided more than information, Kellerman replied. You provided an example of competence without arrogance, of strength without cruelty, of how to carry impossible burdens with dignity. He gestured to the others. We took a vote last night. We wanted to have this. He handed her a wooden plaque, clearly handmade in the base workshop. It was engraved with the Observation Post 7 designation and a simple inscription. In recognition of Corporal Rhaena Thorne, who defended the East with unmatched skill and taught us that legends are built on truth, not tales. Below there were the signatures of every soldier on base. Rhaena felt her carefully maintained composure waver. She began, then stopped. Thank you. All of you. This means more than any official commendation could. Hammond stepped forward and hugged her quickly. Stay safe out there, she said. And remember that you have friends here if you ever need them. Cabrera was next. You taught me that being good at something means constantly working to get better, he said. I will not forget that. One by one, soldiers approached to shake her hand or offer words of appreciation. Even soldiers she barely knew, who had only observed from a distance, wanted to acknowledge what she represented. The quiet professional who had proven that skill and character mattered more than rank or reputation. Ridge was last. He pulled her aside slightly, away from the crowd. I've been doing this for 23 years, he said quietly. I have worked with thousands of soldiers. You're in the top 5 people I have ever served alongside. Whatever comes next for you, you will excel at it. Because excellence is not what you do, it is who you are. Thank you, Master Sergeant, Reyna said. That means everything coming from you. One more thing, Ridge said. He handed her a small notebook, similar to the one she kept. I have been keeping notes on teaching techniques while watching you train the marksman. I thought you might want them, for when you end up running an instructor program somewhere, which you will. Reyna accepted the notebook and tucked it carefully into her pack. The Humvee driver signaled that it was time to leave. She loaded her gear into the vehicle and took one last look at Forward Operating Base Granite. The observation post stood silent against the desert backdrop. The mountains beyond held their eternal watch. This place had tested her in ways she had not expected, not through combat, but through social crucibles that were in some ways harder to navigate than tactical ones. The drive to the landing zone was brief. The helicopter waited with rotors already turning, kicking up dust devils that danced across the hard-packed earth. Reyna loaded her equipment, strapped in, and gave the crew chief a thumbs up. As the helicopter lifted off, she watched the base shrink below her. She could see the eastern ridgeline where she had made those impossible shots, the range where she had trained the designated marksman, the compound where she had endured weeks of mockery before proving herself through undeniable performance. The flight to Bagram took 2 hours, following valleys and mountain passes that she recognized from her previous work. These mountains had been her home for 3 years, her proving ground and her prison. Now, she was leaving them behind, transitioning back to conventional military service with all its structure and limitations. Part of her mourned the loss of the pure focus her contractor work had provided. But another part recognized that teaching and mentorship offered a different kind of purpose, one that might help balance the weight of 55 lives taken. At Bagram, she processed through the reception center with the efficient detachment of someone who had done this many times before. New orders, new duty station, new challenges waiting. A sergeant approached her during the in-processing, a woman in her 30s with combat patches and the bearing of someone who had earned their position. You are Thorn? The sergeant asked. Corporal Reyna, Thorn from Granite? Yes, Sergeant, Reyna replied. Word has spread about what you did out there, the sergeant said. The engagement at extreme range. The training program you started. Command is very interested in your capabilities. They're discussing whether to send you to the Advanced Special Operations Sniper course as an instructor or to embed you with units that need precision fire support. Whatever serves the mission best, Reyna said. The sergeant smiled slightly. That is what everyone said you would say. Well, you'll find out soon enough. For now, get settled. You have earned some rest. Reyna completed her in-processing and found her assigned quarters, a small room that offered more privacy than she had enjoyed in months. She unpacked her gear carefully, setting up her space with the same attention to organization that marked everything she did. The plaque from Forward Operating Base Granite went on the small desk, a reminder of difficult lessons learned and relationships transformed through persistence and proven competence. That evening, she sat on her bunk and opened her journal to add a final entry about her time at Granite. She wrote about the mockery and the isolation, about the engagement that changed everything, about Kellerman's transformation and Ridge's wisdom. She wrote about teaching and mentorship, about finding purpose beyond the kill count. And she wrote about the future, uncertain but filled with possibility. If you connected with this story, Drop a comment and let us know what resonated most with you. Maybe it was Reyna's quiet strength in the face of mockery. Maybe it was Kellerman's journey from antagonist to ally. Or perhaps you have witnessed similar situations where someone proved themselves when it mattered most. Share your favorite moment, or tell us about someone you know who showed that kind of courage and competence. Your stories matter, and we would love to hear them. As she closed the journal and prepared for sleep, Reyna reflected on the strange path her life had taken. From the mountains where she had worked in shadows, to a forward base where she had been mocked and then vindicated, to this new chapter where her skills might serve a broader purpose. The burden of 55 lives remained, would always remain. But perhaps through teaching others to be more effective, through preventing future casualties with improved training, she could find a measure of balance. Not redemption, which felt too grand and too easy. Just balance. The weight of what she had taken matched against the lives she might save through the knowledge she could share. It was enough. It had to be enough. And as sleep came, bringing with it the familiar dreams of distant mountains and the faces of those she had eliminated in the name of mission success, Reyna Thorne allowed herself to believe that the next chapter might be slightly lighter than those that came before. Not easy, never easy, but perhaps meaningful in ways that justified the cost she had paid to acquire these terrible and necessary skills.